Series 2 of Space 1999 arrived on Blu-ray and DVD last September from Network Distributing. This much-maligned second season of Jerry Anderson's 1970s sci-fi series, chronicling the adventures of the 311 men and women trapped on Moonbase Alpha when the moon is blown out of Earth's orbit by a massive nuclear explosion, has been unavailable in the UK for over a decade, and as a result the arrival of a new HD release was highly anticipated for many years. In the run-up to the release, Network's Twitter feed was counting down the top 5 second series episodes based on a poll held on their website, so I figured, why not do the same thing myself?
Move over and let an expert take a look.
I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Space 1999's second and final year. Oh, I'm aware that compared to the first season it's a bit of a step down in terms of overall quality, that the loss of certain key personnel both in front of and behind the camera, Barry Morse and Sylvia Anderson to name just two, hurt the production considerably, and that interference from the powers that be in America led to some really unfortunate decisions. Despite all that though, I can't find it in my heart to hate it the way some people do. There's a lot of good aspects and good moments in the second series, even if you have to wade through a fair amount of nonsense at times in order to find them. It's also worth remembering that the series was cancelled after the first season and was only revived on the understanding that certain changes would be made in order to give the show a better chance of success in the all-important American market. In other words, it was this or nothing.
That's disgusting.
With that in mind, while I fully appreciate that something utterly unique was lost when the show was retooled for its second year, I would certainly rather have the second season we got than no second season at all. If it's this or nothing, well, I know some people feel strongly enough about Series 2 that they would choose nothing, but I'm not one of them. Here's 5 episodes with much to offer even the most dedicated Series 1 fan.
Oh, I can't wait.
Number 5. The AB Chrysalis. The moon is being rocked by explosions of ever-increasing intensity as it approaches an unknown planet. With the next explosion expected to be strong enough to destroy Alpha, Koenig, Meyer and Allen head down to the planet to investigate, where they find a civilization in hibernation awaiting the right moment for the rebirth of their species. As the hours count down, can the Alphans contact and negotiate with the aliens before the next explosion destroys Alpha?
I know what I want to do.
Choosing an episode for 5th place on this list was difficult. There were several other worthy candidates, The Exiles, Dorzak, The Seance Spectre and Devil's Planet to name a few, but I finally settled on this one because the nature of the threat faced by the Alphans is a welcome return to the sort they encountered during the first season. That's going to be a common feature of the episodes I've chosen in my top 5 actually. Several episodes of the second season feel like they were written for the first, indeed a handful of them were, and while as far as I know this wasn't one of them, it certainly recaptures the same sense of mystery and wonder as was prevalent there.
I think it's trying to communicate.
One often raised criticism of the second series is that the antagonists are usually just baddies for the sake of being baddies, at least compared to those encountered during the first series. While I wouldn't entirely agree with that, there are 1 or 2 stories where that is definitely the case, but this isn't one of them. In this episode, the Alphans are up against a force that really just wants to be left alone to do its own thing, and when these pesky humans get in the way it reacts not with malice, but with logic when it attempts to stop them. It's one thing to go up against an adversary that wants you dead just for the sake of it, it's quite another to deal with something that sees your survival as an insignificant aspect of a much larger equation. Another recurring criticism of the second series is summed up by one of the show's best writers, Series 1 script editor Johnny Byrne, and has to do with the presentation of Alpha's residents during the second series.
Suddenly we were not talking about Earth people anymore. We were talking about some kind of ghastly alternative Star Trekkers. They were spacemen. There was nothing they couldn't handle. Anything that was thrown at them by aliens who are inevitably malevolent.
Right, Eagle!
It was get the bastards before they get us. Kick ass quick or they'll kick us.
It's an interesting point and highlights how often in the second series the Alphans' response to trouble, or even to the threat of trouble, was to shoot first and ask questions later. The most obvious and baffling example of this can be found in The Exiles, where Koenig stuns an alien who's offered to help improve the base's life support system, just to see if their weapons actually work on him.
What are you doing?
Then stands over the fallen man's body and decides he'll let the guy work for them after all.
I had to make sure our weapons were effective against them. I had to stop.
Seriously, dude, what the hell? The Alphans in the first series often had to defend themselves, but they were scientists and explorers first, not soldiers, and certainly not idiots.
This isn't quite your style, is it, John? Shoot first and ask questions afterwards.
Here, though, the situation is very much out of the Alphans' control, and rather than resort to force or violence or a big dramatic showdown, Koenig presents their case as best he can. Martin Landau is terrific here when conveying the character's increasing desperation. Then he and the others choose to return to the doomed Alpha, knowing that chances are they're not going to be able to make it back anyway. It's all rather touching, especially when we cut back to Alpha and see that Helena and co are already preparing themselves for the worst. There's a particularly sweet moment where a tearful Helena notices Bill watching her, and she forces herself to give him a reassuring smile even though you know she isn't feeling it. It's a nicely understated character moment, and all done without a single line of dialogue. Unfortunately, there is a little bit of silliness here. Another goofy Maya transformation, although that's pretty much a regular part of the show by this point, and to be fair, the creature doesn't look that bad. Well, no, okay, it does, but there were much worse than this. Sillier still is the realisation of the aliens A, B and C, 2 fog-shrouded naked ladies and a naked guy who has truly terrible hair. It says something when I'm presented with 2 beautiful naked ladies and I'm more concerned about some guy's hair.
I didn't really notice that.
And naturally, the ladies have a mild verbal catfight over Commander Koenig, even though they come from the stable of sci-fi characters who do not know what this emotion called love is.
Your decision is clouded by attraction.
Attraction?
For the commander. You want him to stay, to be your lover.
In one of many sequences in the second series that feel like a homage to the original Star Trek, you could pretty much switch Commander Koenig for Captain Kirk, and it would play just about the same. It's very much a pulp sci-fi scene in a series that had previously managed to avoid such cliches.
It is obvious and stupid.
The design of the alien planet is more than enough to offset any of these problems, however, with a particular highlight being the bouncing spherical voice probes the Alphans deal with for much of the episode, later to provide an inspiration for the Zeroids in Terrorhawks.
You're not serious.
As is the sense of growing despair among the Alphans that this really could be the end of the line.
Let the log show, I commend all personnel for their courage, fortitude, and devotion to duty since we left Earth orbit.
We all know it won't be, of course, but despite that, their jubilation at their survival at the end of the episode seems very real and uplifting.
Hope is better than despair.
Creation is better than destruction.
We also get a rather exciting sequence to open the episode, showing Alpha taking heavy damage from an explosion, and who doesn't shed a tear at this poignant moment?
Kate, you alright?
Yes, Commander, I'm alright. My scanner's taken a beating.
There, Kate, we'll get you a new scanner.
Yes.
This isn't a story I see making many people's favourite episode lists, perhaps due to previous VHS and DVD releases using a rather murky print with poor sound, but it's very welcome in my top 5, and it'd be nice if the Blu-ray release has seen it earn a well-deserved re-evaluation.
I just wanted to tell you that, you seekers of perfection.
Number 4. The Bringers of Wonder, Part 1. A rescue ship arrives from Earth, manned by friends and relatives of the Alphans, and preparations are made for the crew to finally return home. Only Commander Koenig sees the visitors as something to be feared, for in his eyes these are not friends from Earth, but hideous monsters.
That's terrific.
The first half of the show's only 2-part story, and almost from the start it's obvious that a lot of money has been saved up to be spent on this. From a gripping Eagle crash sequence at the nuclear waste domes, spectacular fight scenes, an equally spectacular fire sequence, and more extras than we've seen all season. Seriously, even characters we've never seen before are reunited with friends from Earth. That's how many people are in this episode. The money is right up there on the screen.
Did you ever see such a beautiful sight?
The joyous prospect of the Alphans finally returning home, an idea that had only really been played with once before, is presented realistically, and once again the characterizations are strong, especially in the scenes where the Alphans are reunited with their lost loved ones. Tony catching up with his brother, Koenig's joy when Helena breaks the news to him, and Maya feeling more like an outsider than ever before are all great scenes very true to the characters. Even Sandra and Ben, who have been little more than props up to this point, get their moments to shine. The script hits every note you'd hope to see in a scenario like this, and it's almost a shame when the time comes to move away from the character development and get onto the story proper.
Oh, you poor dear.
The reveal of the alien creatures is extremely well handled too. The direction, the music, the editing all combine to provide a terrifically memorable sequence as Koenig freaks out in Command Center, with Martin Landau again doing a brilliant job. As for the aliens themselves, I can never decide if they're effectively scary or the silliest things I've ever seen. but they're certainly unique and memorable creations, and again, much time and money has obviously been spent making them look as disgusting as possible. If nothing else, you're never going to see anything like them again in any other show or film, and that alone makes them worth a look.
Naturally.
Part 2 is by no means a poor follow-up, although, as is often the case with two-part stories, it is definitely a step down from Part 1. Suddenly, Koenig, who has been so hysterical throughout Part 1 that he's been unable to get anyone to listen to him, is calm and rational and able to convince those around him that the visitors from Earth are imposters. With the aliens exposed, the mystery is gone, and now all that's left is to stop them. To do that, we need to embark on slow-motion fight scenes on the lunar surface, prolonged hallucination sequences showing the few remaining alien-controlled Alphans believing themselves back on Earth, and the slowest, most hilarious chase scene in television history. Part 2 also contains my favourite continuity cock-up in the entire series, as the date given in Helena's log places Part 2 nearly 2 years after Part 1.
Moonbase Alpha status report. 1912 days since leaving Earth orbit. Moonbase Alpha status report. 2,515 days since leaving Earth orbit.
Meaning that every single subsequent episode of the series takes place in the middle of this two-parter.
Isn't that strange?
That said though, Part 2 provides a vast, beautifully designed set for the interior of the atomic fuel store, very reminiscent of the larger scale sets that were a common feature of the first season, and many of the back on Earth sequences are very cleverly done, as the astronauts think they're doing one thing when really they're doing something else. Elements like these mean it's still in the better half of the second season, it just doesn't quite reach the heights that Part 1 did. Eventually, both episodes were bolted together and re-released as a feature film in the early days of cable and satellite, and as the home video market began to take off in the early 1980s, it was this feature that appeared on the very first Space 1999 videotape. It isn't hard to see why it was this story that was selected to showcase the series. Viewed back to back, the increased budget and sheer scale of both episodes do lend the overall production a suitably cinematic quality.
That is hopeful.
Only one of the 2 episodes can make this list, however, and it has to be Part 1. The increased attention on the characters and their relationships, both with each other and those they left behind on Earth, coupled with a gradually building sense of unease leading to the reveal of the aliens, makes this a standout not only of the second season, but the entire series. Number 3. The Metamorph. An eagle is captured while on a mineral survey over the dying planet Psychon. When Koenig and co go down to the planet to recover the 2 pilots, they themselves are also captured by Mentor, one of the planet's few remaining inhabitants, who seeks to use their minds and those of the other 300 Alphans as mental fuel for a biological computer. With the planet on the brink of disintegrating and Mentor turning the power of Psyche against Alpha, can Koenig convince the scientist's beautiful daughter Maya to betray her father and help them escape, even if the price is the ultimate destruction of her entire world?
It will be done.
The second season premiere brought many sweeping changes to Space 1999. New characters were introduced without explanation.
Hello.
Just as many old characters disappeared without explanation. And the overall look and feel of the show changed dramatically, without explanation. At times it seems more like a brand new series totally divorced from what had gone before than a continuation of the original.
Yes, it is.
So with all that in mind, it's rather amazing that the Metamorph is as effective an opening episode as it is.
Is there no vile thing you won't say?
Let's address the main positive of this episode, and indeed the entire second series, right away. Thank God for Catherine Schell. The character of Maya was added as a hook to get America interested in the series again, and in the hands of a lesser actress she could have been very, very silly. Some would argue that she was anyway, that having a shapeshifter who could easily get the Alphans out of any difficulties they may encounter was a bit too dramatically convenient. And while it's true that she was often used as a plot device, the idea of a shapeshifting character isn't in itself a bad one. It's all a matter of presentation, how the character's abilities are used. If used sparingly, then the audience is more inclined to suspend their disbelief when those abilities are used. Star Trek Deep Space Nine ran for 7 seasons without ever falling into the trap of overusing their shapeshifters' abilities, but used every week it becomes not only silly — how many times did Maya turn into a guy in a gorilla suit anyway?
Who cares?
— but boring too.
Prejudice.
That's not prejudice.
What is it then?
Fascination.
Ignoring the metamorph aspect of Maya, it's important to note that Catherine Schell brought 2 vital aspects to the character that probably weren't there on paper: a playful sense of fun.
I'm about to turn into a fox today.
and an understated vulnerability. The former was vital to a drama series that was now taking a more tongue-in-cheek approach than it had done previously, and Shell had a talent for delivering both strongly dramatic performances one moment and displaying that mischievous twinkle in the eye the next. Nick Tate was also very good at this.
You're not giving up, Tony, are you?
Oh, no. He's just going back to the drawing board. Pilots.
It helped make Maya seem more believable, which was essential when dealing with a character who could turn herself into a 10-foot dinosaur monster whenever she felt like it. Maya's vulnerability was also an intriguing part of the character. Whenever a reminder of her status as the last living Psychon came up, you just wanted to reach into the screen and give her a hug. The pain in her eyes was so obvious and so raw that it almost didn't need any dialogue to back it up.
Everywhere but on Psychon. I'll be an alien.
Likewise, whenever the prospect of a return to Earth came up, Maya would often end up withdrawing to a corner so as not to, as she put it,
I don't want to disturb everybody.
as if she knew deep down that she would never really fit in anywhere. She was a genius, but with a naive streak.
Me, naive.
An outsider who was often baffled by the ways of humans. It's a familiar character concept, especially in TV sci-fi, but Shell made the part entirely her own, and it's hard to imagine any other actress in that role. In The Metamorph, we're presented with a young woman whose belief in her father blinds her to the terrible crimes he is committing in the name of their planet's preservation, and even after she learns the truth, she still clearly doesn't want to believe that not only could he be capable of such evil, but that he could have deceived her for so long. It's a beautiful introduction to one of the most interesting and well-performed characters in the entire Jerry Anderson canon. It's also worth noting the quiet dignity of Brian Blessed's performance, and yes, I did just use the phrases quiet dignity and Brian Blessed in the same sentence. I'm surprised too. This episode was recorded not long before he made the transition from Brian Blessed actor to Brian Blessed professional shouty man. Check out his appearance in Blake 7 just a year later to see the kind of mentor we could have had.
That is what gives me the right to roll!
Now that he's achieved national treasure status and is mostly known as a figure of fun, I'm not criticising here at all, I think he's great.
You are wise!
It's easy to forget that at one time Blessed was capable of delivering a subtle, multifaceted performance. Here, as with his guest appearance in the first season, he's no ranting maniac, but a brilliant scientist with a dream of restoring his dying world. At times he almost seems to be lost in that dream, as in the scene where he's explaining it to Koenig.
Commander. Psyche.
While the character may be a touch more simplistic than those presented in the first season, he's still one of the more memorable antagonists the series ever presented.
Great!
Psychon is another beautifully designed addition to the Space 1999 universe. From the steaming volcanic surface to the underground catacombs and Mentor's compound, populated by a variety of captured aliens. A greater variety of aliens than we've ever seen before, actually, even if some of them aren't perfectly realised. Nappy-wearing guard, I'm looking at you. This is a very well-constructed world, and the scenes of its demise provide a suitably exciting climax to the story. The Metamorph is as strong an opening to the second season as Breakaway was to the first. While it's true that the second season had its problems, almost none of those are on display here, and what we get instead is an effective reintroduction to the series that builds on the successes of the first year while also adding a fresh, interesting new character to the mix. There couldn't have been a better opening episode than this one.
Well, at least somebody is happy.
Number 2. The Beta Cloud. When a mysterious energy cloud appears in the moon's path, the majority of Alphans fall ill, leaving only a skeleton crew to investigate. An eagle sent out to study the cloud returns to the base, but when it lands, out steps not the pilot, but a frog-faced monster intent on stealing Alpha's life support system for the cloud. Why the cloud would want it is never explained, but really, does it need to be?
He's falling for it.
Even the most forgiving fans of the series would not expect to find this on a list of best episodes, let alone in the number 2 slot. But if I was ranking these episodes on sheer entertainment value alone, then this one wins the entire series, albeit possibly for all the wrong reasons. Against all odds, it ranked 4th in Network's countdown, so clearly I'm not the only person out there who loves this one, despite being fully aware of its shortcomings.
You're going to kill us with kindness.
What we get here is a fantastically silly runaround, as the Alphans struggle to defend the base against a creature that proves impervious to all forms of attack. And trust me, they try everything. That's one of the reasons this episode works for me. It's a non-stop string of action set pieces, and when one fails, it's off to the next set to try something else. As obviously silly as it is, it never lets up, and never has time to get boring. The monster itself is also a great character. That's Dave Prowse in the costume, just a year or two away from donning the famous Darth Vader suit. And despite having no scripted lines, he manages to imbue this pathetic creation with no small degree of personality. You just can't help but feel sorry for this poor creature as it plods aimlessly around the base, being shouted at by its master the Cloud, and taking out its considerable frustrations on any clipboards or microscopes that happen to be within striking distance. Despite being virtually indestructible, it's also slow, awkward and clumsy, and seeing it repeatedly lose fights with electric fences, doors and hoses, or being distracted by not particularly loud noises is hysterically funny. The whole thing feels like a spoof, except nobody's told the actors. This episode's, and quite possibly the entire series' crowning moment of glory comes early in the creature's rampage, when a cornered Tony attempts to fend off the advancing monster by hurling a fire extinguisher at him. The heavy-looking prop hurtles through the air, nails the monster square in the crotch, and Prowse staggers off screen with a very audible cry of... Tony Anholt looks around in vain for a cry of cut that never comes, and gamely carries on with the scene. The only reason I can think for the scene not to have been reshot or for that expletive to have been removed during editing is that everyone was laughing too hard to notice it.
Oh, very funny.
There are several genuinely commendable aspects to this one though, with both Koenig and Helena falling ill under the influence of the Cloud.
I can't hold up, you take over.
So that Landau and Bane could nip off on holiday for a bit. It falls to Tony and Maya to take charge of the base. And my goodness, doesn't Tony do well.
Run, Maya! Run away! Run away! Run away!
It does make a change to see the second leads and supporting characters carry an episode for once. Underrated second series stalwart John Hugg is especially well used here. And for once, the Tony and Maya relationship is actually addressed, even if it does get reset pretty sharpish at the story's conclusion.
Right.
There's also lots of new incidental music, scored for a later episode but appearing here first, and some interesting camera angles from director Robert Lynn, both of which really inject a sense of energy and pacing to the episode. It feels much more fresh and exciting than other episodes made around the same time. A lot of people hate this episode, and I can see why. It's about as far removed from the original concept of the series as it's possible to get, and everything that was wrong with the second season is on full display here. It's certainly a long way to fall from Breakaway to the Beta Cloud, but that's one of the reasons I love it. This episode was written by the show's producer for the second season, Fred Freiberger, so this is basically nothing less than a showcase for his vision of the show. And what a wonderfully silly vision it is, full of daft monster fights and dumb characters doing stupid things. Good on him for having the balls to share that with the world. Well played, sir. The Beta Cloud is one of the most unintentionally hilarious hours of television you'll ever sit through, and I absolutely love every gloriously insane moment of it.
Well, how about that?
Number 1. The Immunity Syndrome. A landing party investigating a seemingly uninhabited planet runs into trouble when the planet suddenly and inexplicably becomes hostile to them. With their numbers diminishing and their resources literally disintegrating, the surviving Alphans must find a way to solve the mystery before the entire landing party is wiped out. The penultimate episode of Space 1999 is a good example of the heights the second series was capable of reaching if left to its own devices. Actually, the final third of the season, from the two-parter onwards, are all good stories well realised. Yes, I am ignoring the man in the gorilla suit from the Lambda Factor, and so should you.
You sure play rough, honey.
And it's a shame that such an obviously talented cast and crew were constantly having to deal with interference from America for much of the year. Where this episode succeeds over those that surround it is in the greater focus on the characters instead of action. Generally, characterisation was one of the areas where the second series scores over the first. Despite the silliness that may have been going on around them, these people often seem more real than they had the year before. The most obvious example of this is in the presentation of Barbara Bain's Dr. Russell, a warm and genuine human presence in the second series after having been... Honestly, I don't know what she was in the first series.
Never underestimate the extent of human inventiveness.
By this point, however, the series had built up a large cast of regular and recurring characters, and all of them are given their moment in the spotlight here. Tony Anholt in particular is terrific here, first as a deranged Videshi on the run, then spending the second half of the episode at death's door. It's certainly a long way from his comedy beer-brewing antics of previous episodes. Also, this episode makes the clever move of taking the series' two romantic couples, John and Helena and Tony and Maya, and separating them for much of the story. The boys are stranded on the planet while the girls are up on Alpha worrying about them, before deciding to embark on a suicidal rescue mission. Rather than the usual mild flirting, we really get a sense of how much the characters genuinely care about each other. Tony and Maya's touching reunion is a particular highlight. It adds another element of tension to a story that's already brimming with it.
John?
Even supporting cast newcomers Alib Parsons and Sam Dastor get more screen time here than any of their predecessors. And is it just me, or is Martin Landau starting to look a lot like Terry Wogan towards the end of the series?
Doubtful.
Once again, the threat comes not from an aggressor out to destroy the Alphans, but from an intelligent, reasoning being just doing its thing. The creature in this episode, while lacking a little in the presentation department, we don't need Blu-ray to see that it's a guy behind a rock turning a flashlight on and off, is one of the most alien the series ever presented. A being who, until the arrival of the Alphans, didn't even know that there are other forms of life than itself, and whose desperate attempts to make contact end up causing madness and death. In the best traditions of Space 1999, the problems are caused not so much by villains being bad, but from accidents, misunderstandings, and sheer bad luck. There's some great design work in this one too. The forest planet, while clearly just a set and not quite recapturing the wonderfully alien feel of worlds like Piri or Terra Nova from the first series, still doesn't feel like a set. Excellent use is made of the limited studio space to make it feel much larger than it probably was, while at the same time establishing a definite sense of the planet's geography. On the model front, we also get a spectacular eagle crash landing in the forest. Okay, so it's largely footage from the previous episode, but the build-up to the crash and its aftermath is handled 1,000,000 times better here than it was there, as well as a storm sequence involving a never-before-seen and rather impractical mode of Alphan transportation, the re-entry glider. It also ends on an uncharacteristically, for the second series anyway, bittersweet note. The alien creature is grief-stricken over the deaths it caused, possibly to the point of committing suicide. Its fate is left suitably vague. And the Alphans resolve everything just in time to save themselves, but too late to settle on the planet.
Just when we find what could be a lovely home, we can't stay.
That line rather sums up my own feelings at the end of this episode. Just as the series finally re-established its own identity, it was axed once again, and this time there was to be no second reprieve from cancellation.
I really didn't think we were going to make it.
On the surface, the Immunity Syndrome may be a bizarre choice of favourite episode, but I firmly believe that everything that made the second season worth a look is at its best here.
Oh, that is good news.
If you're a fan of the first series but you've never really given the second much of a look, then this is the one I would recommend. If only there could have been more like this. Preferably an entire third series full.